And yet, here's something that I think we need to think about. Whenever we consider these possibilities, we need to constantly be mindful of the fact that we love to scare the hell out of a film.
Warning, this is not entertainment.
Hey everybody, this is not an episode that was planned or scheduled. This is something that I've debated over the last few hours whether or not I wanted to publish this and put this out in the airwaves for anybody to listen to. I'm generally a private person, and I don't like to talk about family matters or personal things, especially as they involve my children over the airwaves. But in this particular incident, and because of the content, which we'll talk about in a moment, I thought that this is probably the best forum to talk about this. And this is, again, less of a podcast and more of a request for information. With the community and the audience that we've been fortunate enough to build on this podcast, I know that a lot of you out there have had unique, even somewhat paranormal experiences. And I'm kind of leveraging that, to be honest with you, to look for answers. So this is not only the seeker in me publishing what I'm about to talk about here in the next few minutes, but more so the parent in me. So with all that aside, you're probably wondering what the hell I'm talking about. I'll just jump right into it. I'll try to keep this brief. I know I don't have the greatest ability of telling a story succinctly or quickly, but I'll try to do it here. So last night, my son had a really wild experience. He and I are the only two in the house. We've been here by ourselves for the last couple of days. And last night, he was sleeping alone in his room. I wake up this morning and the bedroom light's on in his room, which is odd because I know it was off when I went to bed the night before. I put him to bed the night before. I go in and I shut the light off, and he's out cold. This is like 7:30 a.m. And I let him sleep for a little while, don't think much of it. I go downstairs, I do some reading, kind of get my day started. But at 8:30, he's still asleep. And just to give you some background, I mean, this kid is an early riser. Like, my son is normally up at like 6:30, 7 o'clock at the latest. Sometimes he's up even before 6. So it was strange that he was still asleep at 8:30. So I go and I wake him up. I lay down next to him. And this is where it gets kind of strange, and this is where I'm hoping you guys can lend some advice or maybe just share something that would help me understand what the heck was going on. But I wake him up, and he is groggy at first, but when he sees my face, he jumps right up, and you could tell he was trying to catch his breath. I mean, he sounded startled, like almost hyperventilating, like he'd been pursuing something anxiously, or he had been being chased. I don't know, but he was almost in tears as well. He's almost crying, and it was almost like that feeling of like when someone has been trying to get somewhere for a really long time, and then they finally get there. It was just like a relief, but also just an emotional, marathon. And you could tell that's what he had been on. I mean, my son is 6 years old, so he's not acting or creating any sort of, false impression here. Like, this was all genuine, and I'm expecting him just to be tired. I'm asking him, what's going on? And before I could really even get much more than, what's going on, and he starts telling me what had happened over the last few hours. He told me that he woke up at about 6 a.m. and I was still asleep. So he went back to bed and he turned his light on. 6 years old, he doesn't want to sleep in the dark. And he turns his light on and crawls back in bed and falls back asleep. And he said that after he went back to sleep, he was taken to another planet, is what he told me. He said he left his body behind and he went to another place. In fact, he told me he went to 2 planets. And, child's imagination, I'm just listening at this point thinking, okay, this is going to be an interesting story. But he tells me that he was 100% conscious and aware of the fact that he was asleep. He said, I was dreaming and I knew that my body was dreaming. And I told the people that I met that I was dreaming. And I asked him what people that he met. who they were. And he said on the first planet he met several people, and I won't use names here for privacy reasons, but one of them was a neighbor of ours who's he's very close with, a kid about the same age as him. And he said that he met her, and she didn't recognize him. She didn't know who he was. He was at our house in our backyard playing with her, as he often does. And he said she didn't know who he was, but he told her he was trying to get home because he missed his parents, and he didn't know how he got to where he was, but he knew that even though it looked like home, it wasn't his home. And the reason why was because some of the features were different. So this was interesting. This is where I started to perk up a little bit, because this past spring I built a chicken coop and a vegetable garden enclosure in my backyard. So both of those are relatively, new additions to the property. And he said in the dream, in this world that he was taken to, neither of those were there, but the house was there and it looked pretty much the same. He said the furniture was rearranged and some of the things in the house were different, but nobody was in the house besides him. And he said, she didn't recognize him. She didn't know who he was. And this is when he used the word that was, I guess, intriguing, but also, I don't know, maybe confusing a little bit for me, trying to piece this all together and make it make sense for my own rational brain. He said that he went back in time. He was stuck back in time. And the interesting thing about that is that, back in time, being, let's just assume it was a year ago, this neighbor would have still lived there, but we wouldn't have. We moved here about almost exactly a year ago, maybe a year and a half now. So if he had gone back in time, quote unquote, to any time period within 2 or 3 years, but more than a year and a half ago, it would have looked like the way he described it. The yard looked pretty much the same. There were some differences in the shrubbery and the bushes, which uniquely, and I noticed, he did point out that the landscape looked kind of like it did before we moved in. And on top of that, the way he described the furniture in the house looked like pictures that I had seen of the previous owner having the arrangement in the living room, which my son never saw, by the way. But in the dream, my son pointed out, furniture being in certain places, and it matched the way it looked when we moved in. When I came here, I came with a friend and moved some of the old furniture out before my family ever moved into this house. So nobody else besides me ever saw what the layout actually looked like. But when he ran downstairs that morning after telling me this story, he actually pointed it out again in person, showing me where everything was. Coffee table, the couch that was left here, everything. And it matched pretty much as far as I could recollect. So that's when I started, taking this seriously. As I'm laying in his bed and he's telling me this story, I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. He goes on to tell me that after that, he got really sad because she wasn't able to help him find his parents. We weren't there. He was in this place. He was home, but he said it was different. We weren't there, and it seemed like he was in a different place in time, or a different point in time. And again, bear with me because I'm trying to explain this the way that my 6-year-old son explained this to me, and I don't want to embellish it or add details that he didn't give me, but I'm trying to deduce and make sense of kind of fragments, or him using words that make sense to him but may not necessarily make sense to you and I as adults. So what happens after that is he says he gets teleported or transported, I think was the word he used, to another planet. And he used the word planet again. And on the second planet, he said, again, it's our house, but it's a different point in time. And he said, things looked more like they do now, but not exactly the same. I don't know what that means. He did say the chicken coop still wasn't there and the vegetable garden wasn't there. But he said this time our other neighbor was there. And this is a boy also about his age who lives on the other side of us, just down the road. And they often play together, sometimes all three of them. And this boy didn't recognize him either. So he was sad and confused because he didn't know how to get home. And he's trying to find people to help him find his parents, he said. And nobody could help him get home. And meanwhile, he's telling these people, including our neighbor who he recognized, that he was aware that he was dreaming. He said, I'm asleep, I'm dreaming. So he's aware that he's lucidly dreaming. And he wanted to just get back home, get back to, the current timeline, get back to the right place at the right time, I guess. So he was at the right place, just at the wrong period in time on both of these planets. And at this point, I'm starting to think, okay, this sounds kind of like, string theory or something, And the similarities with with some of the concepts of string theory were striking. And not to mention that he uses, references to things like time travel, which made me start to think that maybe this is more than just, a child's imagination. Maybe this is a perception of something that actually, took place, and I should listen to him and take it seriously. And granted, I want you to know I did take him very seriously from almost the onset when I recognized that he was emotional. I guess the best way I can say this is I think often as adults we tend to brush off stories from children as, the imaginations of young kids, and we don't really pursue it much beyond that. And I really try to consciously avoid that, because I know that as a child, I had some experiences that were genuine and truthful, and I really didn't have the words to describe them, but they were real nonetheless. And I've always believed, and I still believe, that there is something supernatural about the mind of a child before it's been conditioned to the world, before it's been indoctrinated, that you have an ability to accept reality and to absorb information that may be esoteric or even paranormal from the perspective of an adult, just because you haven't been conditioned to think otherwise. You haven't been conditioned to see the world in terms of immaterial versus material. So everything is just reality to you. And as a child, I had some experiences like that, out of body experiences, voices talking to me that were not coming from a person who was physically present there in the room, things like that, ghostly apparitions. So I take those very seriously when I hear it from others, especially from children. And this is the first time that I've heard that from somebody close to me, let alone in my own household. So bear with me. This is a raw recounting. This is not going to be like other episodes. I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not even going to edit this. I really just want to get some information here. But this situation, with my son was genuine and raw, which is what I'm getting at. And what was striking was what happened after he said he visited the second planet. He said he was taken to a place where there was a man, and he said there was a man there with other kids, and the man seemed friendly, but he didn't know who the man was. And again, I'm giving you all these details now because they're fresh in my brain. I didn't want to wait a couple days and try to publish this, because I know I'll forget a lot of the details if I don't record them right now. So bear with me as I'm just formulating ways to phrase fresh thoughts and fresh content that I just received from my 6-year-old. But anyway, the man in this place, I don't know if this was another planet or just, some undefined location. The man was with other children, and my son, who was very nervous and scared at this time, and he's still trembling as he's telling me this story, he says the man told him not to be afraid and that he would help him get home, but first he had to wait until the other children took a nap. So this man is like a guardian. He's watching over a group of other children, and from the way my son described it, I got the impression that it was a lot of other children there. He said, when the other children go to sleep or take a nap, I think was the word he used, I'll help you get home. He said the man held his hand, and after the other children took a nap, the man helped take him home. And he said he took him back to his home planet. And that's when I woke him up. He said that's when he woke up, was right when this man took his hand and took him back home to his own planet. And he said he felt like the man was good. He was friendly. He was safe. And I asked him what he looked like. And he didn't give me details of what the man looked like, but he said it wasn't anybody he recognized. It wasn't me. It wasn't anybody else that he knew. He just said the man was nice and he trusted him. And that was the precise moment when I woke him up in his bed. He said he had been trying to wake up and telling his body to wake up, but he couldn't wake up. But when I came into his room and forced him awake, that was when the man had just returned him home. Now, that was a pretty cool story. At that point in time, I'm not thinking it's anything, exactly paranormal. I've had some wild lucid dreams as well. And, this is a kind of a textbook version of that with some, interesting components around time travel laced into it. But what got really interesting was what came after. So he jumps right up out of bed and goes downstairs. And as I told you before, he starts pointing out what the layout of the living room looked like in this other planet that he visited, how things were the same, but how things were different. And then I opened the sliding door to my backyard right off the kitchen. And he looks out the door and he says, we need to go check. I need to see if it was real. And I go, see if what was real? And he just goes, follow me. So I follow him outside. I'm really curious at this point. I'm just observing. He goes down to this patch of woods, kind of like a small patch of trees and shrubbery, and we have a tire swing attached to it. And he goes down there. He goes, yes. He goes, it's here. It's real. He's like, I wasn't dreaming. This was real. And he points out a particular branch. And I should preface this by saying he calls this area his bat cave. Like, he goes in there with a pair of scissors and he like grooms the shrubbery in this place. He's hollowed out the middle of it and he's turned it into like his little outdoor laboratory. He calls it the bat cave, and he goes down there with his friends and, pretends to be in Batman's lair. And he's done a lot of work down there with cutting branches and moving them. And he says, in the second world, this is him talking now. He said, in the second world, where our one neighbor was there, again, I won't use the name, but this is the boy neighbor. He said in that world, he kept bumping his head against a certain branch. And his older brother, who was also present in the second world, these two brothers lived next to us on down the street. He said the other brother was climbing up this branch, and he points up the tree branch there. But the one that he was bumping his head against, it was interesting because that branch, it's not something that, you would just notice unless you were looking for it. My son noticed it specifically. He started like digging through the shrubbery and pointing at that branch. And uniquely, that was one of the like few branches I noticed there that, was long-term growth. It had been there for a while. And with all the grooming and landscaping that my son had done in there, he'd taken a lot of those branches out. This one was still there. So if we're taking seriously this idea of time travel, that he was visiting this precise location at a time before we lived there and before he had started making modifications to the branches in there, this one would have still been there. So take that for what it's worth. So after that, he felt justified that, he had really gone back in time, or gone to a different planet, as he called it, where everything was still the same but different. Like, none of the modifications that we had made to the property had taken place yet or happened yet, which would account for why the neighbors didn't recognize him, because they didn't know him at that point in time. Anyway, I thought that was the end of the story. We go back inside. We start, talking about it. I make him breakfast, thinking, that if he has some breakfast, watches a cartoon, maybe he'll just calm down and not be so emotionally stressed out about it, because he was still, kind of freaked out at this point. So I make him a waffle, a couple of eggs, and he sits down, starts eating breakfast. I turn on a cartoon, and I just give him some time, to wake up and do his thing. This is where it got a little wild, and this is the part where I decided I needed to jump behind the microphone and put this out here for the Eschaton audience. My son runs upstairs really quick while he was watching a cartoon. Right after he finishes breakfast, he gets a piece of paper and a pen. He's an artist. He loves to draw and color. But he starts making this picture, and maybe I'll post a picture of this up on the Eschaton Facebook page. I don't know. We'll see. But I noticed right away that something's unique. He draws a head of a creature, and it looks like a textbook gray alien. For those of you who aren't familiar with the grays, it's the stereotypical small, scaly alien with the big oblong-shaped head, slit mouth, smaller, non-present nose, and the big bug eyes. That's the defining feature, is those giant bug eyes, and the huge forehead. Well, that's what this had. I don't know where he would have ever seen that before. My son's never seen any, alien-type sci-fi movies. I have never talked to him about anything like that. And I paused the cartoon instantly as I'm looking over his shoulder, and I ask him, what are you drawing? Are you drawing a creature from the cartoon? He's watching Power Rangers. And he says, no, this is from my dream. And he uses the word alien. He says, this is the alien I saw in my dream. And I immediately get cold chills and want to pry for more information, but I also don't want to frighten him or, force him to, get excited so that he starts embellishing the story and saying things that, he doesn't recount or recollect properly. So I'm doing everything in my power that I can to just be normal. And I said, alien, who, you didn't tell me about an alien in your dream. He says, well, it was the man. He says the man was an alien. He was half alien, half man. What I would call a hybrid, right? And many of you who have ever looked into these things would say this is a classic version of a hybrid. He said he had very, man-like features, but you could also tell he was an alien. So anyway, he draws the rest of this picture. It's got the body of basically a man, normal limbs, same number of digits, but and I think he had ears as well. He put the ears on at the end, which is unique because grays don't really have ears. But in every other aspect, this was the head of a gray alien. And my son says, yeah, this was the man who helped me get home. And I get cold chills. Like I'm sitting there like, what in the world? Because I grew up with all that, the gray alien lore, the reptilians, the Nordic race, all that stuff. Like I listened to Coast AM, as I've said many times on this podcast. My father was really into that stuff, but I've sheltered my son from that. Just not because I have anything against any of that or the pursuit of it by any means. It's the opposite, if anything. I just don't want to precondition him or indoctrinate him to start thinking that he has to have those kinds of experiences or believe that those things exist. Kind of like the impression, that I felt I had as a child. I felt like I believed in those things maybe because I was raised to believe in those things. So I've just kept my son and my daughter sheltered from any sort of supernatural, paranormal type stuff. So you can imagine my surprise when I see a picture of a gray alien staring at me that was drawn by my 6-year-old who said he met one last night while he was time traveling in outer space. And that's why I wanted to record this episode, because as it stands this morning, that's where we're at. He drew this picture. I have the picture. He says this was the man who helped him get home, but he was an alien. And I asked again, I said, was this man dangerous, threatening in any way? And he reaffirmed, no, like he was good. He was the only one who would help me. And he seemed to be the only one who knew how to help him get home. Like nobody else seemed to know what he was talking about. And he was frantically in his dream. And you could tell when he woke up with the hyperventilating and the panting, he was so relieved to be home. And I felt so hopeless and helpless, to do anything about it because, as a parent, I don't know what to tell him when your kid has an experience like that. That's his and his alone. I wasn't there for it. And he was so happy that somebody was able to help him get home, because you could tell that in this dream, he felt like he had been struggling for hours, maybe days or years. I don't know how long it felt to him, but he had been trying to get home for so long and he couldn't, and nobody recognized him on either of these planets. And he said this alien, knew how to help him get home and was very friendly and held his hand. But the unique thing was he told him that he had to wait until the other children were sleeping. So I don't know what that means, guys. I can't make heads or tails of it. Maybe it's the elaborate imagination of a 6-year-old, but I you know me, I don't buy that. This is why I do this podcast, is because that's precisely what I want to kind of rally against, is that simple narrative. Like there's something more here. I don't know what it is, but maybe you do. And that's the only reason why I'm recording this. Again, this isn't polished. This is nothing like any other episode of Eschaton. This is simply just me reaching out to my community, because I know a lot of you out there have had some wild experiences. So I'm asking you, if you have any information, please reach out to me. Even if you've never contacted me before, I'd be very happy to hear from you. You can contact me. My email address is linked in the show notes, but if you don't check the show notes, it's josh@joshuawisley.com. That's josh@joshuawisley.com. Again, that's Josh, josh@joshuawisley.com. You can also contact me directly through the website, joshwisley.com, or on Facebook. Shoot me a message, private message me through the Eschaton Facebook page or the group community if you're part of it. This is really just my request for explanations, for answers. If you have any reading material, any links to YouTube videos that you want to send me to, I'm all ears at this point. As I said earlier, this is more of a concerned father than the seeker in me talking. Although I'll admit the seeker in me is very curious and intrigued by this experience as well. But that's it. That's the story. My son had a wild encounter last night. I don't want to embellish it or make more of it than what it is, but if you've had anything similar happen to you, or if you've heard of anything similar and you could point me in the right direction, please let me know, because as much as I've studied gray aliens in the past and out-of-body experiences and time travel, I really know nothing. I think I've only scratched the surface when it comes to quote-unquote abduction experiences or, astral projection, which I think this may have been. So I'm very open to any possible explanations, any interpretations, and I'm really leaning on you guys to reach out and do me a solid here. So thank you for listening, if you did listen to this, and we'll get back to the regular sort of format and content with Eschaton in the future, but this probably won't be the last time we'll talk about this. I'll follow up after I hear from some of you, and I do hope to hear from at least a few of you. So I'm counting on you guys to help me make sense of this. Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk again soon. Bye.
Parallel universe, if you will, that would be contained within the same sphere that the rest of the timelines are contained